We begin this Tuesday morning with the race for the White House. Vice President Kamala Harris now officially on the campaign for the Democratic presidential nomination.
Here's the big headline this morning. An NBC News tally finds a majority of pledged delegates for the Democratic convention have endorsed Harris. That cements her status as the clear frontrunner for the nomination, less than 48 hours after President Biden announced he would drop his re-election bid. Later today, she'll be in Milwaukee for her first official event as a candidate. The Harris campaign announced it has brought in a record $81 million in just 24 hours. In her first full day as a candidate yesterday, the vice president welcomed college athletes to the White House, stepping in as President Biden continues to recover from COVID. She later visited the campaign headquarters in Wilmington, Delaware, speaking to campaign staffers as the nation watched and listened.
So in the days and weeks ahead, I, together with you, will do everything in my power to unite our Democratic Party, to unite our nation, and to win this election.
Meanwhile, former U.S. Attorney Eric Holder has been tapped to lead what's going to be a very compressed vetting process for potential running mates for Harris. This is according to sources familiar with the matter. Several elected officials, including those from battleground states, are reported to be in consideration to join the ticket.
We have team coverage ahead this hour, including the latest on who may potentially join Harris on the Democratic ticket. Let's begin with NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba with the latest on the Harris campaign. Monica, good morning. So the Democratic Party quickly consolidating around the vice president. Tell us about Harris's first full day as a candidate for president, including the messages it appears that she's focusing her campaign on.
Yeah, it was an extraordinary first full day of the Harris campaign in action, Joe and Vicky, and that's because Vice President Harris decided that after that NCAA event at the White House, she wanted to go to Wilmington, Delaware to see the former Biden campaign headquarters, which now becomes her own. And she started to lay out her own theory of the case here, using some elements that we've heard in stump speeches when she's been on the trail, but really for the first time putting together how she's going to use her background as a prosecutor and as an attorney general to really prosecute the case against the Republican nominee. Take a listen to how she put that.
Predators who abused women, fraudsters who ripped off consumers, cheaters who broke the rules for their own gain. So hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type. What kind of country do we want to live in? A country of freedom, compassion, and rule of law? Yes! Or a country of chaos, fear, and hate?
Now, we saw a little bit of this when back then former Senator Harris was running in the primary against Joe Biden in 2020. That was a little bit of her campaign message, but obviously it takes on new meaning now that she has been vice president, and she will try to couple that with what they've been able to accomplish in their view in the last 3.5 years as well, guys.
You know, Monica, President Biden is expected to return to the White House today for the first time since he tested positive for COVID. We heard from him yesterday on the phone for the first time since he submitted that letter dropping out of the race. What's he now saying about the race and what his expectations are in terms of his address to the nation and now supporting Vice President Harris on her presidential bid?
And this was an added element to what we saw there at campaign headquarters. President Biden did call into that event. He did make a couple of opening remarks, but his main takeaway to the staff there who had been working for him for the last 1.5 years was to really embrace his vice president. And here's a little bit more about what he had to say about this dramatic shift now.
It was the right thing to do. I know it's hard because you poured your heart and soul into me to help us win this thing. The name has changed at the top of the ticket, but the mission hasn't changed at all. And by the way, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be out there in the campaign with her, with Kamala.
So he said that he is going to be campaigning for her. We know he is returning to the White House today, and it seems like he does want to give this major speech detailing his decision about bowing out of the 2024 race. The exact timing, venue, format, and location of that is still being worked out, but we do know, according to sources close to the president, that he wants one of his first major acts upon returning to the White House to be this speech. So I think we should see that at some point in the coming days, guys.
Monica, I mean, Democrats are still moving forward with plans to select their nominee virtually ahead of the party's convention next month. Real quick, explain why they need to do this early. What should we know about this process?
And before everything changed and before we saw this seismic movement, the plan had been for the Democratic National Committee to do this in a virtual roll call ahead of an August 7th deadline that they say is about an Ohio ballot issue. So they had already kind of had those wheels in motion, though there had been some question about exactly when it would take place. But the point being, it would have to happen before the August 19th Democratic National Convention in Chicago. So now they're trying to figure out whether VP Harris is going to be able to have her own running mate named by then to also then be formally nominated. They're still figuring out a little bit of that part of the process, which is a key part now.
Monica Alba now covering the Harris campaign. Monica, thank you so much.
Well, now that the reset button has been pressed on the race for the White House, we're taking a closer look at Kamala Harris's political track record and who the vice president could choose as her running mate. As NBC News Now anchor Hallie Jackson reports, there are multiple contenders among Democratic leaders in key battleground states.
Vice President Harris working the room, trying to capitalize on this critical moment and reintroduce herself as a presidential candidate. The latest twist in a journey that's taken her from the West Coast to the White House. The daughter of Jamaican and Indian immigrants, shaped by her parents' civil rights activism, Harris reflecting on her childhood while running for president in 2019, memorably criticizing her future running mate, Joe Biden, for his record on busing.
You know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools, and she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
Harris rose to become California's first black and South Asian attorney general in 2010 before her Senate run 6 years later, where she at times turned congressional hearings into cross-examinations.
I'm asking you a very direct question, yes or no?
Democratic allies arguing Harris's background as a prosecutor helps her press the case against former President Trump and his felony convictions. Now, Harris will likely run on the broader Biden-Harris agenda, with Republicans already seeking to exploit what they see as political liabilities on the economy, inflation, and immigration, after Harris was tapped to lead the White House response to root causes of the border crisis.
We've been to the border. We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe. And I mean, I don't understand the point that you're making. I'm not discounting the importance of the border.
But on the issue of abortion access, which Democrats think could mobilize voters come November, Harris has been among the administration's loudest voices advocating for protections.
How dare these elected leaders believe they are in a better position to tell women what they need?
Now, the one-time running mate set to select a running mate of her own, racking up endorsements from those speculated to be on the short list, like California's Gavin Newsom and Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear.
The contrast between her and those running on the other side couldn't be clearer.
Other possible contenders, Democrats who could help in key battlegrounds, like Pennsylvania's Josh Shapiro, Arizona's Mark Kelly, and North Carolina's Roy Cooper.
I want to make sure that Kamala Harris wins.
Our thanks to Hallie Jackson for bringing us that story. For more on the Harris campaign and its search for vice president, let's bring in NBC News senior national politics reporter Jonathan Allen. Good morning, John. So NBC News has confirmed that former Attorney General Eric Holder is now going to lead the vetting process for Harris's running mate. I mean, this has got to be done. Time is of the essence. Do we have a sense of a time frame at this point for a VP announcement?
We don't know exactly when that announcement's going to come, but obviously the Democrats were already working toward a virtual roll call because of some of the state rules in terms of when people had to be on the ballot. So, you know, look, I'd be very surprised if we didn't have a name within the next couple of weeks here.
When it comes to possible running mates, let's talk about names. Take us through the contenders. Who are the front runners? Who do you think could give Vice President Harris the biggest boost where she might need it most?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the way this works is a little less like a bracket and more like a sort of a job interview, I guess. We're looking at some of the contenders on screen right now, some people we think are in the mix at least. You know, Gavin Newsom's team says he doesn't want this California governor. You got Mark Kelly, an Arizona senator who's gotten a lot of traction early. Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland. Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky. Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary, one advantage for him is that he's already been vetted. The White House has all of his information. And, you know, a name that's not on this list, but I've heard come up is Admiral William McRaven, who oversaw the raid that killed Osama bin Laden. It may be that that Vice President Harris, as she moves into that presidential campaign, or has already essentially moved into that presidential campaign role, looks for somebody with some military national security experience that goes beyond hers.
You know, John, before you go quickly, what does the vetting process look like? You said Buttigieg has already gone through it, but what would it mean for these other governors and potential candidates?
I mean, this would be a hypercharged version of it. You know, there's no real vet to become a governor or a senator. That means that they're going to do, you know, as quick as they can, background checks. They're going to look for everything they've ever posted to social media. They're going to look through speeches, any controversies they've had in their career, what they've said about Kamala Harris in the past, you know, what they've said about Donald Trump. So it's just you know, basically like cramming for an exam if you're Eric Holder and the vetting team.
It sounds like August 7th is really the date to hit. John Allen, thank you so much.
So what did voters think about this new matchup? NBC News Now anchor Zinkley Essamah went to the critical battleground state of Pennsylvania to ask voters about this late-stage campaign shakeup.
Biden stepped down and promptly endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris. How do we feel about her?
I mean, we don't know much about her yet, to be honest. The only time she ran for national office was the 2020 primaries, and she didn't even make it to the caucuses. And even in her 4 years as vice president, didn't hear much from her except the occasional immigration thing.
Very supportive of her. I think that she's been a part of President Biden's success. She's been there every step of the way. Lately, she's been out talking about the abortion issue. I think she's been on the trail with him. She has to introduce herself a little bit more to America.
As a black woman, as a former prosecutor, do you think the U.S. is ready for its first black woman, Asian American Democratic nominee, let alone president?
I think we are, and I think we should be. I think it's well past its time. I mean, we have to reimagine what the president looks like.
And I understand you said that if Biden did not drop out, you would support RFK Jr. Is that right?
Yeah, I would not have supported Biden.
So where do you stand now?
Again, I want to see more about Kamala. I'm not quite, you know, I just want to learn more about her.
You've pointed out that Trump, in your own words, is also old. However, that has not been a focus of the campaign, at least so far. Do you think that might change with Vice President Harris?
For all of the people saying, you know, there are two old guys in this race and we don't want either one, well, here's your opportunity for someone who's not an old white guy.
What are the main issues that matter to you in this race?
I think rights, civil rights, women's rights. I think the abortion is important. As a black woman, mother, wife, I worry about my children. I worry about the future of the country.
You said you're a mother. Your daughter's right next to you. Do you worry about those things?
Definitely.
If Vice President Harris clinches the Democratic nomination, who would you want to see as a potential running mate?
I would like to see someone who can help get some of the swing states on board. If there are folks who are worried about her gender or her race, maybe it needs to be a white guy just to bring comfort to the rest of the voting bloc.
I would go with someone that I don't think has a presidential future, just because, like, there is, like, someone like Josh Shapiro, in my opinion, has a very high presidential future for the Democratic Party. I just feel this election is going to be very difficult to win because you only have 4 months to run a campaign.
I think the biggest thing for me would just have to be wanting to pick someone who can help pull a swing state.
Let's do a brief show of hands. How many of you think Vice President Harris, as the Democratic nominee, could beat former President and now Republican nominee Donald Trump? I see one no. Why?
I just don't think she has enough time. It's going to be really hard to pull off a campaign in this short a time. And you also have to remember, in the next month, she still has to convince everyone in the party to unite behind her.
In contrast, you three raised your hands almost immediately. Why do you feel Harris could beat Trump?
The alternative is terrifying. If she loses, it's terrifying.
I also think that she has the appeal to bring younger voters out to vote. I think before with Joe Biden and Donald Trump, you just had a lot of young people just not feeling as excited. And now it's like, you know, you can go on social media and see so many people excited about Vice President Kamala Harris running.
Our thanks to Zinkley Essamah for that report.
After this weekend's dramatic decision by President Biden, the Trump campaign is now ramping up its attacks on the new candidate, Kamala Harris. Mr. Trump is calling Harris incompetent, and he criticized her lack of progress on immigration policies. NBC News senior Capitol Hill correspondent Garrett Haig breaks down how Trump stands against Harris in recent polls.
After 615 days focused on Joe Biden, the Trump campaign shifting gears for a likely showdown with Vice President Harris.
I guess she's going to run for president now.
Mr. Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, mocking Harris at a rally in his Ohio hometown.
I was told I was going to get to debate Kamala Harris, and now President Trump's going to get to debate her. I'm kind of pissed off about that.
Trump campaign aides tell NBC News they've worked for weeks preparing to run against Harris. The former president expanding his attacks on Harris in recent days.
She's not a competent person. She shouldn't be president. I mean, she's being laughed at all over the world.
But her potential elevation could change some of the fundamental dynamics of the race, with Trump now the oldest candidate. Running a possible Harris-led ticket could also re-energize younger and more diverse voters. A poll taken within the last 24 hours shows Harris doing better than Biden against Mr. Trump, the race within the margin of error. And previewing a new Trump line of attack against Harris, an allied group releasing this ad accusing Harris of a cover-up.
Kamala was in on it. She covered up Joe's obvious mental decline.
Our president is in good shape, in good health, tireless, vibrant.
The GOP also not letting up on President Biden, with top Republicans, including the House Speaker, demanding he step down now.
The president should resign. The reason is, if everyone acknowledges that he is incapable of running a campaign, then he's clearly incapable of running the country. I mean, he has the nuclear codes.
And Vance argues any Democratic voter turned off by what he calls a coup against President Biden should vote for the Republican ticket instead. It's an argument the Trump campaign hopes will ring true here in Virginia, a state that hasn't gone red since 2004.
All right. Thanks, Garrett.
Democrats and Republicans were on the same page yesterday at a tense hearing on Capitol Hill. It was a bipartisan grilling of Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle. At issue, the security failures that contributed to the assassination attempt against former President Donald Trump just 10 days ago.
Cheadle took full responsibility for the lapses in security, but she failed to provide answers about how the gunman gained access to the roof where he carried out his attack. The hearing became combative at times as Cheadle seemed to dodge what some lawmakers called simple questions. Take a listen.
Secret Service's solemn mission is to protect our nation's leaders. On July 13th, we failed.
I don't want to add to the director's terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day, but I will be joining the chairman in calling for the resignation of the director.
Because Donald Trump is alive, and thank God he is, you look incompetent. If Donald Trump had been killed, you would have looked culpable.
You're here pursuant to a subpoena under oath in front of Congress, and you're unable or unwilling to answer some of those same questions.
Tell us what went wrong. If you have an assassination attempt on a president, a former president, or a candidate, you need to resign.
You're full of today. You're just being completely dishonest.
Congress not holding back. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale joins us now to talk more about the hearing. Ali, good morning. So both Democrats and Republicans clearly, visibly frustrated by the lack of answers from the Secret Service director. Did we learn anything new about how this shooting occurred? What were some of the key takeaways?
Not really, especially because a lot of the specific questions that lawmakers asked elicited the response from the Secret Service director that it's only been, at that point, 9 days since the shooting in Butler, and they're still actively investigating this situation. It's rare when you see all members of Congress on the same page on something like this. Of course, not rare at all to see these congressional hearings get testy, get fiery, even in some cases get off the tracks. But on this one, everyone really did seem to have the same question, and it mimics a lot of what we've likely heard from our friends, from our colleagues, from Americans writ large. This idea of how could something like this happen? And the Secret Service director, while maintaining that she thinks she's the best person to continue in this job, also
said she wasn't ready at that point to provide those answers. It's something, frankly, that she laid out at the very beginning of that hearing, and you knew that it set the tone because every lawmaker was going in that room and they were likely to be frustrated with the lack of information. Certainly they walked out and they were exactly as frustrated as we thought they would be. I think what this ensures is this is not the last time that they are going to haul the Secret Service director before them and try to demand some answers.
So, Allie, we heard from a string of lawmakers. They're calling for her resignation on both sides of the aisle. This morning, a handful of lawmakers are saying they plan to file articles of impeachment to have Cheadle removed from her position. So walk us through that process. Is there enough support after her testimony yesterday to pass any impeachment article?
Impeachment has actually become a pretty frequently used tool here by House Republicans when they want to go after a member of the Biden-Harris administration. I mean, we saw them do this with the head of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas. That, of course, was unsuccessful. There's also this idea of inherent contempt, where you can ask these folks to pay a fine or even potentially be arrested by the House Sergeant at Arms. This is an old rule on the books being applied in modern times. But now both of those things, both contempt and both inherent contempt and impeachment, are on the table for the director of the Secret Service. We could see something on that by the end of the week. One of those resolutions on impeachment has been filed in a privileged fashion, which is the House's way of saying you've got to take it up within 2 legislative days. We are only at Tuesday, if you can believe it. So we could see that resolution get a vote by the end of the week. And that impeachment vote could be done in bipartisan fashion, especially when you consider the fact that the end of that hearing yesterday involved the ranking member of the committee, Jamie Raskin, who you showed, joining with his Republican counterpart, the chairman of the Oversight Committee, James Comer, to say that the U.S. Secret Service director should step down. This is something that will continue to mount a pressure campaign from Capitol Hill. Of course, the impeachment or inherent contempt resolutions will only add to that. It adds pressure on the administration to push her out of this job, as now the calls are bipartisan and the questions are only getting more.
Let's talk about what's next beyond this possible impeachment here. When can we expect to actually see a report from the Secret Service about this shooting? And you say this may not be the last time she's before Congress. Could we hear from Cheadle again?
Most likely we will, especially because other committees were willing to subpoena her. The Oversight Committee got the first bite at the apple, so to speak, here. But as we see more information coming from the Secret Service, that is something that we're going to see Congress immediately demanding. Most of the members who left that hearing yesterday, guys, said that they wanted to hear from Cheadle again. They have so many questions, including how could that gunman have gotten on the roof? At what point did he become a threat, which would have delayed the rally's start, versus just being a suspicious person, which didn't have any impact on Secret Service, allowing the former president to get on stage and begin his rally. All of those were questions that went unanswered. Certainly there's going to be more in the coming days. And as soon as we see any kind of report from the Secret Service, you can bet that Congress is going to say, hey, we want you to come back and we're willing to subpoena you to do so.
All right. Allie Vitale, thank you so much.
Well, it is time now for a check on your morning news now weather. And here in New York, we might want to keep our umbrellas handy as summer showers are moving east today. We felt a few sprinkles this morning.
Yep, a little bit. NBC meteorologist Angie Lastman is tracking everything for us. Angie, good morning.
Hey, good morning, guys. You're exactly right. We've got some of that wet weather moving through parts of the Northeast. That is going to continue moving out, but we will still remain unsettled across parts of the South and Southeast over the next couple of days. Here's that batch of moisture, though, that I mentioned. Boston to Maine, basically that's where you're seeing most of that rain and points interior of that. Otherwise, New York, Washington, D.C., Atlantic City, you've all started to see that rain wrapping up, but that doesn't mean you might run into some wet roads as you're out and about early this morning. But by later today, it's mainly the mid-Atlantic focused down to the southern plains that we'll watch closely for some of these showers and thunderstorms. Now, the good news is we're not looking at a lot in the way of severe weather. That chance is relatively low for the day today, so we won't be looking for those kind of impacts, but we could see some really slow-moving storms over the same areas with some impressive rainfall rates. Plenty of moisture to tap into. So those rainfall rates leaving us with the chance for some isolated flooding, some localized flooding here as we go through at least today and into tomorrow. You can see it still remains unsettled as this stationary front is kind of parked over the southeast. We've got an area of low pressure and then an extending cold front draped across parts of the Gulf Coast. Now, this is going to leave us, as I mentioned, unsettled, but also with a couple of chances for us to see that flooding, specifically most concerned about parts of Texas and Louisiana, Atlanta, where we could see anywhere from 2 to 3 inches of hourly rainfall rates. That means that by the time this is all said and done, anywhere from 1 to 3 inches of rain is possible, but upwards of 5 inches. That's one of the spots we'll watch. Also, Atlanta included in the chance for seeing some of that flash flooding here through the next couple of days. This is going to be something we track through Wednesday. Again, some of the higher amounts, 5, 6, 7 inches. We know that Texas has already received ample amounts of rain over the past couple of weeks, guys. So not needing this rain, but definitely something to watch for if you live in that area. The flooding will be on the table through midweek.
7 inches is a lot of rain.
It is.
All right,
Sure
Angie,
is.
thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.